Thomas Sankara's widow, Mariam Sankara, has welcomed the verdict by the military court in Burkina Faso, where the former president of the country, Blaise Compaoré, received a life sentence in absentia for his role in the assassination of Sankara. Mariam Sankara, who attended the 6-month trial throughout, said that the verdict represented justice and truth after a 35-year wait. Mariam Sankara said that their goal now was for the political violence in Burkina Faso to come to an end. There is little prospect that Compaoré will serve his sentence anytime soon. He's lived in exile in Ivory Coast since he was removed from office following mass protests in 2014 and has taken up Ivorian nationality. He previously denounced the trial by a military court as being a political sham. Well, still in Burkina Faso, ousted President Roch Kaboré has been released from house arrest nearly 3 months after a military coup toppled his government. The SABC correspondent watching the story for us is Nabil Ahmed Rufai, who's reporting from Accra.
Burkina Faso's interim government says the ousted President Roch Kaboré has been allowed to return to his home in Ouagadougou. He had been under house arrest in a ministerial villa in the capital since January, when he was toppled by a coup led by military leader Paul Dimba. The West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, and the international community had demanded his immediate release. ECOWAS has also suspended Burkina Faso from the organization and called for a return to democratic rule, but the military leader, Paul Dimba, is still acting as interim president. Meanwhile, a court in Burkina Faso has handed a life sentence to former President Blaise Compaoré for the murder of his predecessor. Thomas Sankara was killed during a coup led by President Compaoré more than 30 years ago. 13 others involved in the murder of Sankara were also on trial. 2 of the main suspects and Compaoré were handed a life sentence. Compaoré was not in court when the judge gave his verdict on the murder trial. There are concerns that the former president may not serve his sentence anytime soon. He has been in exile in Ivory Coast since 2014 when he was ousted during an uprising. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, SABC News, Accra, Ghana.
All right, so a number of developments taking place regarding Burkina Faso. And for some analysis, we're now joined by Dr. Lassane Ouedraogo, who's a communications scholar, Africanist and theorist. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me to comment on this important day for Burkina Faso.
All right,
Africa, I would say.
Yeah, a number of things have been happening in the country. We have this coup and former President Roch Kaboré being released. But let's start with Thomas Sankara. The widow says that this has just seen justice being served, and she now hopes for peace in the country. Your thoughts as people were found guilty by the military court?
Well, this trial has been going on for the past 6 months. It lasted 6 months, and the people of Burkina Faso have been waiting for this trial for over 30 years. So clearly, this result is something that pleases everyone in Burkina Faso. The majority of the people are seeing that finally we're reaching a point where justice is being said. So justice delayed is justice denied, but now we cannot talk about justice denied in the sense that it has been said. This is a very interesting moment for Burkina Faso, which needs to absolutely talk with itself, talk among themselves. So, the fact of the matter is that the ruling was done by a military court during a time when the government itself is not a democratically elected government, well, some could use that as an argument to say, well, perhaps this is not necessarily the type of justice we would have wanted to see done for Thomas Sankara. But we need to also remind ourselves that the process itself of bringing Kaboré and the rest of the folks to justice started during a similar regime back in 2014 when the Kaboré government was overthrown, and we had a transitional government that actually worked hardly to put this trial, to set this trial going on. For the Burkina people today, whether it's a military court that is ruling this or a civilian court, it doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is that we have justice, and we now can talk among ourselves to move toward reconciliation.
Yeah. Listening to the evidence, was it compelling evidence that people watching can say this was sufficient, this was a just conviction?
Absolutely. You know, for the everyday folk, every day going about their lives, we all know that Sankara was killed in 1987. We know that after the killing of Sankara, Blaise Compaoré came to power. We know that right after the killing of Sankara, Blaise Compaoré emerged as the new leader and putting aside everything that he did together with Sankara and reversing everything and blaming Sankara for all kinds of stuff. So what we didn't have is just the justice by the judicial system. Otherwise, we all, you know, for the everyday folk, it was clear that the murder of Sankara was orchestrated by Blaise Compaoré. There was no doubt about that, but we needed to hear that said in a courtroom, and that was what has been served, and we're all happy about that.
I suppose in some ways this is more symbolic because former President Kaboré lives comfortably in Ivory Coast with very little chance of extradition and actually ever seeing any jail time.
Well, that is another matter whereby Blaise Compaoré would have to really reflect with his lawyers and his advisors whether he will try to hide in the Ivory Coast or he will return to Burkina Faso and give himself to the justice system and say, okay, I'm here to respond to all the finding on my crimes, and I'm going to demand or I'm going to request forgiveness. You know, under the regime of the former President Kaboré, there was an initiative whereby Compaoré was supposed to return to Burkina and give himself to the justice system to go through all of this, and then we'll talk about forgiveness. And Burkina people are really quick to forgive. If Blaise Compaoré is to return to Burkina today and say, here am I, I've been found guilty of the murder of President Sankara, and I'm asking for forgiveness for the sake of reconciling the Burkinabe, which everyone is talking about, whether it's the regime, the new military regime, or the departed regime of Kaboré, or even the folks who are in Burkina and still supporting Compaoré. There's still this talk about reconciliation. If he was to come back, definitely, I think the reconciliation train will be on march. But if he decided to conceal himself in Côte d'Ivoire, taking Ivorian citizenship, well, we all know that the political system in Côte d'Ivoire is also going to change. It's not everyone in Côte d'Ivoire who is actually applauding Blaise Compaoré. It's not everyone in Côte d'Ivoire who wants him to be to stay there forever. So if the regime of Ouattara was to fall tomorrow and he's in his last term, there's no way he can revise the constitution to go for a fourth term. Then the configuration is going to change, and he might be compelled to return. And in that case, that would not be good for him if he was to be forced out of Côte d'Ivoire and handed over to Burkina Faso.
All right. I want to talk a little bit more about the reconciliation that you mentioned just now, but let's just track back a little bit into history. What went wrong between Blaise Compaoré and Thomas Sankara? They had been brothers in arms a few years before in delivering Burkina Faso from Upper Volta.
Absolutely. If Sankara did not have Blaise Compaoré as his second, the guy always behind him, the guy always supporting him in every situation, perhaps we wouldn't be talking about Sankara today. So Blaise Compaoré had been a very, very key personality and during that term. But interestingly, since you're talking about the reconciliation, we need to go back to this courtroom and say that at the beginning of all of these procedures, they talk about international actors. And at some point, they decided that they're going to put aside the international actors of this crime, because it wasn't just Thomas Sankara who was killed. He was killed along with 12 other folks. So we're going to put aside the international actors. Names in Libya, in France, and Cote d'Ivoire were thrown into the mix, but the court in Burkina estimated that it wouldn't be appropriate at this time around to involve them yet. So that is another leg of the trial, which I guess will continue in some other forms. So I'm bringing this to say that this is not over. And for us to really move toward reconciliation, we need to understand the international context that gave birth to the rising of Sankara and also the betrayal of Compaoré of that regime. He was aided and abetted and was supported by international actors who should be brought to justice today as well, the way we're trying to bring Compaoré back to justice.
All right, so President Compaoré was head of state for 27 years, which means that he had a huge impact, influence, and his shadow perhaps might still be in Burkinabe life right now. How much of an influence is he to the state of affairs in the country still? Well,
for 27 years, definitely he had a huge impact on the national politics. His political party remains a very important voice with millions of supporters. But at the same time, there's a lot of dislocation within that political party, which in the first stance gave birth to the MPP of Roch Kaboré, but later on within CDP, we have seen key leaders take off with a lot of cadre to form new political parties. So the influence of Blaise Compaoré on Burkinabe politics is sort of like a myth. We talk about it, but we don't really see it. The sitting government played along with that for so long, blaming Compaoré for the terrorist attacks, specifically at the beginning of the political crisis in 2016, blaming Compaoré for being behind all the terrorist attacks and so on and so forth. But today, within Burkinabe politics, Blaise Compaoré still weighs something. He's still something. We cannot deny that. But the fact of the matter is that the party is pretty much balkanized, and it is really hard to say that he can come back in or he can give a support to anyone and to allow them to rise up as a leader in Burkina Faso in this current context.
Do you think that these convictions might be a step forward in terms of trying to find peace, reconciliation, and a new order for Burkina Faso?
Definitely, this is the way forward toward reconciling the Burkinabe. For a young Burkinabe person today, this trial is saying to her that there's a possibility of justice in this country. No matter who you are, no matter how long it takes, you can be brought to justice. And that is not nothing for a country that is struggling with fundamentalism, a country that is struggling with the very idea of belonging to one thing. So I have talked a lot about how Burkinabe in the countryside, in certain zones, do not really identify with this nation state. And that is why it is easy for them to join arms groups. It is easy to convince them to take arms and weapons and join fundamentalists. So today, if we're told that even the most, powerful Blaise Compaoré can be brought to justice, that is not nothing. And to me, this is a beginning of a reconciliation, but it depends on how the current political actors are going to utilize the results of these trials to bring us together. It shouldn't be a moment of dividing, but a moment of bringing people together. And I believe that whether it's the widow of Sankara or the hundreds and hundreds of young people who are identifying as Sankaris today in Burkina Faso, this is not a moment when they say, "Oh, okay, let's find whoever was supporting Blaise Compaoré and hurt them, or let's do that." No, it's a moment of saying, finally, we can bury this Sankara. We can bring Sankara. We can lay Sankara to rest. We can celebrate his funeral, because up to today there hasn't been any funeral for President Sankara, because his family doesn't know what happened to him. Who killed him? What happened? We had no idea before this trial. And I think in the next weeks, we will be hearing more about, certainly about a funeral or other procedures that might go in that direction.
Dr. Ouedraogo, your insights always greatly appreciated on the program. Thank you so much indeed for joining us tonight and helping us make sense of what these guilty verdicts of the people that were involved in the killing of Thomas Sankara may mean for your country. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.